I knew I wasn't broken, but every December made me feel like I was. The cold didn't just bite, it settled deep in the bones, in the places no coat could touch. Boston in December had that kind of chill. But the real cold was the silence of coming home alone again. No laughter waiting behind the door, no arms to collapse into. Just the hum of the heater and the echo of my own breath. I pulled my coat tighter, not because of the wind, but because there was no one else to do it for me. Everyone says the holidays are about warmth, about family, about belonging. But what they never tell you is how loud the absence feels when none of that is yours. I had ornaments I hadn't unpacked in 3 years, a tree I never bought, a playlist I avoided because it remembered too much still. I showed up to the parties, to the toasts, to the surface level smiles. I showed up because disappearing felt worse. I mingled with women who asked about my writing, who admired my columns about resilience and love and finding joy. And I smiled graciously, a woman who made her living dissecting intimacy, but couldn't hold on to it if it sat across the table. That night, walking away from another crowded room where I'd laughed too loud and drank too little, I let the ache spill into my chest. I stopped pretending. The world didn't stop, but something inside me did. Maybe that's why I signed up for the damn speed dating event. It sounded ridiculous, even as I clicked confirm. A Christmas mixer in a fancy downtown hotel, 10 conversations, 5 minutes each. It felt like desperation, and I hated that word. But maybe this wasn't about needing someone. Maybe it was about not giving up, not yet. I stared at the mirror before I left, adjusting the black sheath dress that hugged the version of me I wanted to be: confident, magnetic, untouchable. But my eyes betrayed me. The sparkle was tired, still. I went. The hotel was too warm, too perfumed. The bar, dimly lit, pretended to be cozy, but felt like a stage. I checked in, took my little name tag, and tried to look like I belonged. The men arrived in waves, sagging sweaters, greasy smiles, jokes that asked too much too soon. One leaned in and whispered, "So, what's your story?" Like he already knew I didn't have a good one. Another told me he had a wife, but they had an agreement. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just moved to the next chair. By the 6th conversation, my stomach had turned to stone. I didn't want another glass of wine. I didn't want another stranger's breath in my face. I just wanted to go home. But then I saw him. He wasn't part of the event. He was behind the bar, rolling up his sleeves, drying a glass with casual grace. He looked too young, too relaxed, too out of place in a room like this. But when his eyes lifted, something flickered: recognition, amusement, no, interest. I looked away, but it was too late. The moment was already unfolding. The chair squeaked as I slid into place across from a man who already looked bored. He didn't bother hiding it, mid-50s, wearing a too-tight sweater and a grin that had seen better decades. "So, Claire, tell me, Are you one of those career women who thinks love is dead? I blinked. That was his opener. I think love is alive, just. Hiding, I said, reaching for my wine. He smirked like I'd told a joke. Right, let me guess, you're a writer. You've got a cat, you drink Pinot when you're sad. Allergic to cats, I said evenly. And this is Chardonnay. He didn't laugh, just shrugged, took a long sip of his beer, then stared at my chest like it owed him something. I moved on. Table 2 wasn't better, nor was 3. There was the man who used baby like punctuation, the one who showed me pictures of his model trains, the one who asked, without irony, if I'd heard about his Lord and Savior. I lost track after table 5. Each new conversation chipped away at my hope like sleet against glass. These weren't bad men, but they weren't my men. And each one made me feel like I was asking for too much by wanting more than a lukewarm smile and a holiday-shaped placeholder. By the time I reached the final chair, I wasn't sure I had anything left to give. I sat down because it felt too dramatic to leave early. But before the man in front of me could speak, a low voice behind me said, "Miss Bennett, would you care for another glass?" I turned, and there he was, Aidan Walker, messy brown hair, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes like smoke, and soft ruin. I blinked. "You remember what I'm drinking?" He leaned a little closer. "You've ordered the same thing every Thursday for 3 months. I'd be worried if I didn't." I stared at him. "You've been paying attention." He gave a slow shrug. "Hard not to some nights. You look like you're solving the world's problems others, like you're hoping no one asks if you're okay." Something in me fluttered. "Are you supposed to flirt with guests?" I asked. Raising an eyebrow, he smiled, not a smirk, not a grin, a real, slow smile that warmed the space between us. Off in 10. The man sitting across from me cleared his throat. I looked back at him, startled. He was still talking. Something about skiing and Vermont and his ex-wife's dog. I excused myself before he could finish his sentence back at the bar. I waited until Aidan finished his shift. I watched him move smooth, unfazed, the kind of grace that didn't come from trying. He didn't seem like the kind of man who played games. But then again, neither did the last one. He joined me 20 minutes later, wiping his hands on a bar towel. "Sorry about the wait." "I survived," I said. "Barely." He chuckled. "That bad?" I tilted my glass. "Let's just say the highlight of my night so far is this Chardonnay." He gestured to the bartender. "Let's fix that." We talked. Nothing too serious. Favorite films, worst holiday memories. Favorite smells, his. Fresh pine and old books, mine. Peppermint and the inside of a just-opened hardcover. There was something in the way he listened, not like he was waiting to speak, like he wanted to memorize. "I've seen you here before," he said, "always alone. And yet, you never came over." He hesitated. "I thought you were out of my league." I laughed, low and surprised. "You're 10 years younger. You're the one with options." He looked at me like I'd missed the punchline. "Options don't matter if none of them are right." I wasn't prepared for that. for how his words landed. The wine was catching up with me. Or maybe it was the way his voice dipped when he said my name. The way the air shifted when he leaned in. Just enough. We didn't touch. But something touched me. He offered to walk me out. The snow had started again. Soft flakes tumbling under streetlights. Our footsteps were quiet, close. His hand brushed mine once, and I pretended not to notice. But I felt it for blocks. When we reached my corner, he paused. This was unexpected, he said. I nodded. In the best way. He looked at me like he wanted to say more, maybe to ask, maybe to promise. But all he said was, "Next Thursday." I nodded again. Next Thursday. And then I walked away, smiling like I hadn't in years. I counted the days like a teenager with a secret. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I kept telling myself it was nothing. A drink, a flirtation, a moment suspended between snowfall and reason. But still, every morning felt like peeling back the edge of something I wasn't supposed to want. The city moved on, crowded trains, coffee to go deadlines, emails. But underneath, the noise was that quiet pulse. Aiden, I wore red, not screaming red. A shade deep enough to whisper confidence, instead of begging for attention. Lipstick to match. Earrings I hadn't worn in 2 years. At 6:58, I slid into a booth at the hotel bar. He wasn't there yet. I ordered my usual. The bartender smirked. "You're early." I didn't answer. My hands were too busy pretending not to shake. At 7:04, he appeared. Jacket slung over his shoulder. Hair still tousled like he'd fought the wind and lost beautifully. "Claire," he said, sliding in across from me like he belonged there. "You look." I raised an eyebrow. He finished. "Like trouble." "And you look like someone who should have said that more convincingly," I replied. But I was already smiling. The waiter arrived. Aiden didn't look at the menu. 2 Chardonnays. I tilted my head, confident. "Hopeful," he said. Conversation slipped into rhythm. He talked about college, about growing up in Portland, about how bartending was never the plan, just the pause between dreams. I told him about the column, about writing advice I sometimes struggled to believe in, about how most nights I went home feeling like a fraud wrapped in clever sentences. He didn't flinch, just nodded like he understood. "Why now?" I asked suddenly. "You've seen me here for weeks. Why choose to talk to me last week?" He hesitated, a rare thing for him. "It started as a joke," he said. "One of the guys said I didn't have the guts." My stomach tightened. "But it stopped being funny when I looked at you," he continued. "I meant to say something a dozen times, but you seemed untouchable." "Untouchable," I echoed, and it didn't sound like a compliment. He leaned in slightly. Not cold, not arrogant, just guarded, like someone who'd been brave before and didn't get rewarded for it. That silence, that raw, open moment, stretched long. I looked down at my glass. "You're better at reading people than I expected," he grinned. "Tell anyone it'll ruin my charm." After dinner, we didn't say goodbye. We walked, no destination. Just the streets of Boston dressed in fairy lights, our shadows weaving between parked cars and frozen sidewalks. He told me he hated eggnog, that he didn't believe in Santa past age 6, that his favorite Christmas song was River, because it didn't pretend to be cheerful. I like silence, I said, which makes this unexpected. We reached my building. He didn't ask to come up, just stood there, snow in his hair, cold air fogging between us. Next week, he asked. Softer this time, I nodded. He smiled. And just before he turned to go, he looked back. Red suits you, he said. Then he disappeared into the night, and I stood there, heart pounding like it had something to lose. I spent the afternoon deciding between 2 dresses and 1 illusion. The dress I chose was fitted, burgundy, with a hint of shimmer that only showed when I moved, the kind of fabric that felt like a secret. I paired it with heels I hadn't worn in 3 years, and perfume I hadn't dared in 5, something warm, something smoky, a scent that asked the question I didn't know how to say out loud. Am I still wanted by 6:30? I was seated at the bar, the same booth, the same glass, the same nerves trying not to tremble beneath polished fingernails. I kept telling myself I wasn't a teenager, that this wasn't a date, that it didn't matter. But it did. The room around me buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Holiday music hummed under the surface. Everyone seemed paired off couples leaning in close, sharing bites, sharing warmth. And I was waiting, heart open, spine straight, eyes flicking to the door every time it moved. 7 o'clock came, he wasn't there. I checked my phone. No message. No missed call. I sipped slowly. Maybe he was late. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe he was grabbing flowers or something romantic and absurd. Maybe I was ridiculous for even thinking that. At 7:12, I checked again. Still nothing. By 7:25, I stopped pretending. The warmth in my chest had started to recede. My shoulders curled inward, my breath sat heavier. The bartender looked over once, offering a sympathetic glance I didn't want. By 7:31, I was packing my hope back into silence. I stood to leave, fumbling with my coat, when I saw a familiar face, Morgan, one of the servers. I caught her eye and waved her over. She hesitated. That was my first warning. Hey, I said, trying to sound breezy. Have you seen Aiden tonight? We were supposed to meet. Her expression crumpled. Claire, she started, then sighed. I didn't want to be the one to say this, but it was a dare. My mouth went dry. What? The night he first talked to you, some of the guys. It was a stupid joke. He does usually, but I wasn't listening anymore. A dare. The word echoed. Harsh, juvenile, cruel. Morgan kept talking. Something about how he seemed serious after that. How he'd been different. How she thought maybe it had changed. But none of it mattered. Because it had started as a game, I nodded, not trusting my voice. Thanks, I managed, and turned before she could say anything else. The night outside hit like a slap cold. Too real, too fast. I walked, past lights that no longer looked festive, past windows with families inside, past everything I'd let myself believe in for one foolish week. Aiden wasn't coming. He'd never really come for me at all. It had been a joke, a dare, and I'd dressed for it, painted my lips for it, waited for it. I reached my apartment, closed the door behind me, and leaned against it as the weight of it all pressed down. I didn't cry, not right away. First, I poured a glass of wine. Then, I let the glass sit untouched on the counter while I changed into sweatpants and silence. And only then, when the makeup was gone and the lights were off, only then did I let the tears fall, not for Aiden, not even for the dare, but for myself, for the version of me that still, stupidly, wanted to believe. The days that followed blurred into one long, gray ache. I went through the motions, brushed my hair, answered emails, smiled at neighbors in the hallway. But inside, everything felt flat, like someone had turned the volume down on my entire life. I didn't write, not a single word. The blinking cursor mocked me every time I opened a blank document. What could I possibly say to women about love now? What advice could I offer when I'd fallen hard, fast, and foolish? For someone who never meant a word, I replayed the conversation with Morgan more times than I wanted to admit. Every syllable, every breath, the way she looked at me when she said it was a dare, like she was sorry to be pulling the rug out from under me. I kept thinking it had to mean less because it started as a joke. But the truth was, it didn't, because what had grown from it, the connection, the tension, the promise, had felt real. And that was the cruelest part, that something I thought was genuine had been born out of something so careless. I tried to reason with myself. People make mistakes. People follow the crowd. But that night, when Aiden didn't show up, he'd made a choice. And that choice was silence. I spent most of Christmas Eve alone, curled on the couch with a blanket I didn't need, and a bottle I didn't bother to finish. The tree I never decorated blinked faintly in the corner, its lights trying their best to look cheerful. I stared at them like they owed me something. It was almost laughable, how quickly hope can turn on you 1 week. I was wondering if I'd finally found someone who saw me the next. I was questioning everything, every glance, every word, every moment that had felt like magic. Had I imagined it all? Had he ever really meant to come? The worst part wasn't the embarrassment. It wasn't even the anger. It was the quiet voice that whispered, maybe this is all I get. Maybe this was my last shot, and I wasted it on someone who never even planned to show up. I pulled my knees to my chest and let the silence grow heavy. Outside, the city carried on. Somewhere, people were toasting and laughing and falling in love. And I was here, remembering the way he'd looked at me, the way he'd leaned in, careful and bold all at once. The way he'd made me feel like I wasn't just someone waiting out another lonely winter, but he was gone. And I was still here, still waiting for what? I didn't even know. The knock came just after 10. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, a phantom sound in the middle of my empty night. But then it came again, firmer, closer, real. I sat up slowly. the blanket sliding off my shoulders. My wine glass was empty. The lights were low, the kind of quiet that made every footstep sound like a confession. I didn't want to answer. Whatever it was, whoever it was, it couldn't be good still. I stood, walked to the door, put my hand on the knob, and hesitated. Then I opened it. Snowflakes swirled in behind him, Aiden hair damp from the cold, jacket clinging to his shoulders. His hands were buried in his pockets, but his eyes were bare, no swagger, no smile, just something raw, something broken. I didn't say a word. He stepped back, like my silence had slapped him. I shouldn't have come, he said, but I had to. I laughed, short, sharp, bitter. You're right, you shouldn't have. I know, he said. I know I hurt you. Hurt me. I stepped into the hallway, closing the space between us. You made me believe something was real when it never was. You let me sit there, waiting, hoping, while you vanished. His shoulders dropped. I panicked. Panicked, I repeated. That's your excuse. No, it's the truth. He looked away, blinking hard. The hallway light caught the outline of his jaw, the way his breath steamed in the cold. It started as a dare, he said, voice low, but it didn't stay one. My arms folded across my chest, instinctively. Funny, you didn't seem so conflicted when you disappeared. I was scared, he said. I didn't know how to fix it, I thought. Maybe it'd be better to walk away than to make it worse. You mean better for you, he flinched. Silence pressed between us. I thought about coming to the bar, I said, quieter now. I thought maybe you'd be there, maybe you'd explain. But you didn't, you left me alone, Aiden. I hated myself for it, he said, still do. He stepped closer, cautiously, like approaching a wounded thing. But you weren't a joke to me, Claire, not for a second. It started with pressure, pure crap. But when I sat across from you, when you looked at me like I mattered, I didn't know what to do with that. I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't the same boy from the bar, not tonight, not standing in front of me like this, shaking slightly from the cold and maybe something more. You think showing up now changes things? I asked. That this makes it okay? No, he said. I just couldn't let the night end without telling you the truth, without saying I'm sorry. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. What do you want from me? I whispered. Nothing, he said. Just a chance to not disappear this time. I stared at him, at the snow catching in his lashes, at the way he didn't reach for me, didn't beg. He just stood there, waiting the way I had. I stepped aside. The gesture was small, but it was enough. He walked in, slow, cautious, as if the walls might collapse under his guilt. As I closed the door behind us, I said, "This doesn't mean I forgive you." "I wouldn't expect it," he replied. I walked ahead of him, past the couch, into the kitchen, where I poured him a glass of wine from the same bottle I hadn't touched since that night. I handed it to him with a hand that didn't shake. He took it. And for the first time in days, the room didn't feel quite so hollow. The glass of wine sat between us like a question we were too tired to ask. Aiden sipped quietly, his eyes moving around the room, noticing the little things, the half-strung lights, the untouched book on the table, the candle I hadn't lit. He didn't comment on any of it. Neither did I. The silence wasn't heavy. Not anymore. It was waiting, patient. Like snow before it falls. He spoke first. "You changed your hair." I blinked. "Barely." He smiled, soft. "Still noticed." We talked, carefully at first, about nothing important, whether Christmas movies, whether Die Hard was a holiday film. He made a case for it. I rolled my eyes and said he was ridiculous. But I smiled when I said it. Then the conversation shifted. "I used to watch you write," he said, "at the bar." My brow lifted. "Watch me?" "Not in a creepy way, I mean, okay, maybe a little," he grinned. But it was more curiosity. "You always looked like you were trying to keep the world out, like if you stopped typing, something would leak in." I didn't answer, not right away. Because he wasn't wrong, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gaze steady. "What were you writing?" "Columns," I said, "about love, relationships, loneliness. From experience. From failure," I replied. "I write about things I can't seem to get right." He nodded, absorbing that like a truth he already suspected. The fire crackled softly behind us. Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing against the windows like it was asking to come in. I stood, walked down the hall, opened the closet I never used, and reached for a box near the top. Inside was the dress. The one I'd worn that night he didn't show. It still smelled like hope. I slipped into it, slowly, deliberately. When I walked back into the room, Aiden stood, his breath caught just enough to make me feel seen. "I bought this for you," I said, voice low. "And you never saw it." "I see it now," he said. "I see you now." I stepped closer. He didn't move. We stood, inches apart, the space between us humming with everything we hadn't said. I reached for his hand. Not to hold it, just to feel the shape of it, the heat. And then we moved, not toward each other, but into something else entirely. A tide pulling two bodies already underwater. There were no declarations, no scripted lines, just the soft breath of forgiveness, folding into warmth, the slow unraveling of fear, the way the room grew quieter, heavier, as we let the tension dissolve not with words, but with nearness. He touched nothing at first, only looked. And I let myself be looked at, let myself exist in that gaze. For the first time, I didn't shrink. The world outside vanished. The clock, the wind, the weight of last week. Only this remained, the rhythm of breath, and the feeling of something breaking open, not painfully, but like light through a cracked door. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. The distance had already done its work, stripped us bare long before hands ever could. When our shadows finally melted into one, the silence changed. It held us, not like an answer, but like the beginning of one. Morning didn't come with sunlight. It came with the quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything, doesn't rush, just breathes. Aiden was still there, on the couch, legs stretched out, eyes half closed, a blanket folded awkwardly around him. His hair was a mess again, softer now, less performative. I stood in the hallway watching him, waiting for something to feel wrong. But it didn't. It felt unfinished, in the way that books feel when you pause before the last chapter. He stirred when he saw me, sat up slowly. Didn't mean to fall asleep. I know. He rubbed the back of his neck. You disappeared. I gestured toward the kitchen. Just needed water and a little space. He nodded, then looked down. Should I go? I didn't answer right away. My fingers traced the edge of the doorway, my pulse steady now, but thoughtful, the kind of calm that comes after a storm, when you realize the walls didn't fall after all. I don't regret last night, I said, but I don't know what it means. His eyes lifted. It doesn't have to mean everything, just something. I stepped into the room, slowly, not hesitant, just deliberate, like each movement needed to be earned. You're still young, Aiden. Not that young. He's still figuring it out. He stood. So are you. That stopped me. He wasn't wrong. I'd built a life around answers, columns, advice. But I'd never learned how to stay when something scared me, never learned how to trust when the ground was still shaking. I don't need a promise, he said. I just need you to not run. I looked at him, not the surface version, the smile, the charm, but the way he stood, like he wasn't here to prove anything, just stay, if I let him. You hurt me, I said. I know. And you walked away. I know that too. Then why should I believe you now? He stepped closer, not too close. Because I came back. And I'll keep coming back until you believe I mean it. Something stirred in my chest, not butterflies, something heavier, older, the quiet beat of something learning to hope again. I reached for my mug, held it between us like a peace offering. Then stay for coffee, I said. He smiled, not wide, just enough. I take it black. Of course you do. I moved into the kitchen, listening to the sound of his steps behind me, familiar, soft. He didn't touch me. But the space between us didn't ache anymore. It hummed. Like something new was forming, not perfect, but possible. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon, and something trying to be comfort. Aiden moved around quietly, too tall for the small space, bumping into corners he didn't belong to yet. He was making French toast, badly. I watched from the doorway, mug in hand, unsure whether to correct him or just let him try. Did you know, he said, that powdered sugar is basically flour for people in denial? I almost laughed, almost, but the weight from last night hadn't lifted, not entirely. He plated 2 pieces, turned, and set them down with a smile that reached for forgiveness. You don't have to pretend this fixes anything, I said softly. He nodded. I know. I sat down, fork in hand, appetite nowhere near the table. So, now what? He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I've been thinking about leaving the hotel. That caught me off guard. Why? He shrugged. But the movement was too practiced. Because I don't want to keep living in spaces that feel temporary. I want to try something real, build something, even if it's small. You think quitting your job does that? I think showing up does. I looked down at my plate, cut into the toast, didn't eat it. He stepped closer. Claire, I'm not asking you for forever. I'm just asking for a start. I don't do starts well, I said. I've noticed. The honesty stung, but it didn't push me away. He pulled out the chair across from me, sat slowly, like he was giving me time to change my mind. "I should tell you," I began. "I write about people like us. People who try, people who fail." He smiled faintly. "You should write about this." "I don't know what this is yet." "That's the point," he said. "Let it be whatever it is, just don't run from it." I stared at him. He wasn't asking for a label or a promise, just space beside me, a chance to belong to something more than a mistake. "I don't trust easy," I said. "I'll earn it," he replied. It wasn't a grand gesture, no flowers, no ring, no declarations under moonlight. Just a quiet morning, 2 mismatched mugs, and a table barely big enough for our fear. But maybe that was enough for now. The week between Christmas and New Year's moved like honey, thick, slow, sweet in some places, sticky in others. I didn't see Aiden every day, we weren't there yet. But we texted, called once, short calls, filled with pauses and awkward laughter, the kind of calls that weren't about needing something, just about not wanting the silence. I kept writing, or rather, I started again. My next column was different, less polished, more real. It didn't offer advice. It just told a story about a woman who thought she was past being surprised, who wore red on a Thursday and waited too long in a bar, who got her heart bruised and opened her door anyway. I called it the dare I didn't regret. I submitted it on the 30th. New Year's Eve came quietly. No big parties, no sequins. Just a small rooftop gathering at a friend's brownstone. People I barely knew, warm drinks, cold air, music low, laughter soft. Aiden was there. He arrived late, like he always did, coat dusted with snow, hands bare, eyes finding mine across the rooftop. He didn't kiss me right away. He just came over, took the cup from my hand, held it for me like it was fragile. We stood side by side, watching fireworks start too early down the street. He leaned close, not to whisper something clever, just close enough to be felt. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not closing the door." I looked up at him, at the man who once walked away and now kept showing up. "You still scare me," I said. He smiled. "Good." The countdown began somewhere behind us, 10, 9, 8. He reached for my hand, 7, 6, 5. Not to hold it, just to be there. 4, 3. I let him 2. 1. We didn't kiss, not then. We just stood there, breath mingling in the cold, quiet shore somewhere below us. The city cheered. But up here, it was just us. And the dare that had started it all. Some dares hurt you, some dares wreck you. And some dare you to believe again, to stay, to open the door, to begin, even when you're not sure how it ends.